House resumes and debate continue.
Thank you. Gracias. Mr. Speaker, I stand here to give support to this resolution, authorization for credit facility from the International Development Association, IDA, for financing of a disaster risk management development policy with a catastrophe deferred drawn down option ahead. Yes, Mr. Speaker, this resolution, I stand to support it. As indicated by the tense used in this resolution, it clearly indicates that work is ongoing. But given the economic strain based on our vulnerabilities, we need to be prepared. Thus, this bill. We must have, resilience in our country. We must prepare our country for what lies ahead. Our island lies in the direct path of the hurricane trajectory whenever it comes. Events of Erica and Maria has really placed us on the alert. My constituency, Mr. Speaker, was affected greatly by Erica and Maria. We see the effects of climatic conditions, not only in Dominica, but in the world over. And so, having taken that bold step to become the world's first climate resilient country, we not only have to enunciate that initiative, but have to take tangible measures to fulfill that stance. And so, Mr. Speaker, like the Scouts and the Girl Guides adage, be prepared, we are doing just that through this resolution. Mr. Speaker, if there are two things that are certain, are one, climate change is real, and two, we are victims of that reality. When I hear 54 million EC or 20 million US dollars, I think to myself that we can plan ahead in hopes that this amount would be sufficient. But our experience with the people, for example, of Petit Savan, points to the fact that this amount can be utilized in one fell swoop. Mr. Speaker, we are the Nature Isle, blessed with towering mountain peaks, boiling lake, freshwater lakes, waterfalls, 365 rivers, beautiful and bountiful. Yes, but by this very nature, we are prime targets for climate disasters. Our beauty is still our vulnerability. Mr. Speaker, time and time again, we have heard our Prime Minister plead with the world to do something about the effects of climate change, to reduce the effects of the climate change that's going on. He has said and enunciated time and time again, we are not the ones in the small island state bringing that upon ourselves, but we are the recipients of that type of disaster. Mr. Speaker, my constituency, I had to speak because my constituency has been affected greatly. It had its fair share of the effects of disasters caused by this climate change. I grew up in a community where when a storm was announced, we used to run to the riverside to look at because the river at that time meandered on its banks, but not today. We'd go and see the overflow of the river, where we'd collect coconuts, stand by the river, and watch nature do its work. Today it's a different thing. It's very, very different. The river looks for a different path. We have experienced the river making its way into the village, causing destruction. And so when tomorrow comes, 1st of June, the community of Coliho, even Dublin, will be in a panic mode because we know what a hurricane season means to us. Today, as we prepare for the 2022 hurricane season, which is expected to be a very active one, as predicted by the specialists in that field, the community of Coliho, we are very thankful for the mitigating circumstance which this government has given us, a wall, a river wall, a very tall wall. Mr. Speaker, in the amount of $1.5 million. And so, when the rain comes in June, my people won't panic anymore. But because of that intervention, we will feel safer than we were before. Mr. Speaker, so too for the people of Dublin. For we suffered the loss of a bridge. We had one exit point. Today, although the project is not completed, a project in excess of $500,000, it's not completed, but we can cross the bridge, which is what we really need. Vehicles go across the bridge, and that is what we need. So we have 2 points of entry, 2 points of exit. And so I just want to say thank you so very much for this blessed assurance. Oh, Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Mr. Speaker, we will see with this initiative, we will see quicker responses. But we don't really have to use the money, that's there. But it's in case. So that's what this government does, preparing for inadvertent things to come. And so, Mr. Speaker, with this short intervention, I just want to say thank you so very much. With the right hand of the Almighty on our land, we will feel protected, and we will feel the divine intervention that because God loves Dominica. God really loves Dominica. Dominica is a place after God's own heart. But the people, our hearts must be aligned to His, so that we'll execute love, we will share, and we'll be concerned for the well-being of our people. And so, Mr. Speaker, with this short intervention, very short, I just want to say thank you for this intervention, and I support it fully, and I know that my constituents, on behalf of my constituents of Collier, Dublin, Bioche, we are very happy with this intervention, because we can be rest assured that whenever something happens, we, as always, will have the backing of the government. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to make an announcement that I received earlier, but I'd already done the announcement, but I received a letter on behalf of the Honorable Dr. Irvin McIntyre, seeking leave of absence because he's out of state on duties, and is requesting that he be excused from this sitting. So he's excused, and permission is granted for him to be excused. Just wanted to place it on the record. We can proceed. Your mic.
I stand to support the authorization for a credit facility from the International Development Association for financing of a disaster risk management development policy with a catastrophe deferred option. Mr. Speaker, every year at this time, we are faced with the hurricane season. We are faced with uncertainty as to what may happen, what we may face in the coming season. And we pray to the Lord to spare Dominica. One thing is certain, though, that due to our geographical location, we are in the hurricane belt. We have seen in recent times the devastating effects of several natural disasters. We can think of Ophelia, Tropical Storm Erica, the December trough, and Hurricane Maria. The serious damage of 226% loss of GDP, the loss of lives, property, infrastructure, and livelihoods. Further, over the last 2 years, we have seen the adverse effects as we continue to grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, Mr. Speaker, we cannot overemphasize the importance of the proposed disaster risk management policy, and especially with the catastrophe deferred option. And this is as part of our government's broader agenda towards achieving the Prime Minister's articulated vision of Dominica becoming the world's first climate resilient nation. And this continues our tremendous efforts at ensuring the implementation of our plans and policies towards achieving this mission. Mr. Speaker, as we note from our Hurricane Maria experience and our COVID-19 and the COVID-19 pandemic, prompt action and resources for timely response to crisis becomes most critical in saving lives and property. And this therefore dictates wise policy planning, and that we put our house in order and we prepare as best as we can in the event of such a catastrophe. And this is what the facility will allow us to do. We have seen that because we had some money set aside, we were able in timely manner and effective manner to address the effects of Hurricane Maria, the adverse effect, and to build back better. But a lady said it's not just building back better, but building forward. So this, she said we are building back forward. So this indicates, yes, this indicates to us the importance of such a facility. We have had the experience, we have lived it, and we have addressed the issues, and we know that we continue to be affected by climate change impacts. So we have to prepare. And also, it does not only allow us to prepare and to respond to the adverse effects, but it will allow us to simultaneously continue on our path to economic and social development, even as we address adverse effects of storms. Mr. Speaker, this is just one of our government's many measures towards risk reduction, towards improvement of disaster management, and building resilience. There are many other investments and initiatives being undertaken by our government. The Labour Party administration. We know that recently, just last week, we commissioned 2 regional shelters to a tune of over $33 million. And we thank the European Union, a very important partner in our recovery process. And we are not forgetting that we also have already in place the LIO Regional Center and plans to ensure that each region has such a shelter. Mr. Speaker, the many resilient homes being constructed all around Dominica, and soon my own constituency will have the share of 16 resilient homes in Boamo Park and subsequently in Simon in Benz and Calibishi. Mr. Speaker, the great investment on our infrastructure, the many sea defense walls. Right there in Calibishi, we have a resilient wall, which costed $6.5 million, and there are a number of retaining walls all across and repairs to bridges. In the Pebush constituency alone, we have spent over $11 million to ensure we have resilient infrastructure. And this is happening all across the country. And we cannot forget this $127 million investment on the East Coast Road, ensuring we have bridges, resilient bridges, road surfaces, replacement of culverts, resurfacing, and all the works, so we have resilient infrastructure. That is on the DPRP, not BNTF. Okay. This is on the... Also, we make a lot of investments in agriculture, and it's also very sad when people try to underplay the investment that we are making in agriculture, the new initiatives to safeguard livelihoods and food security, which are very important in terms of building resilience. And we can mention quite a number of these initiatives that I'm going to say just we do not only focus as well on infrastructure, but we have to ensure that there is collective consciousness, because you must have people's participation, people taking individual and collective responsibility if we are to become resilient. And through a partnership with CREED, the Ministry of Community Development, local government, that has been working with CREED to ensure capacity building, training of trainers to administer psychosocial support, training in shelter management, in ensuring we have information systems, capacity building training as well for the personnel of managing shelters, among other activities we are undertaking within the communities to ensure that we have stronger and more resilient communities. Because after all, if we speak resilience, I, you, the opposition, every member, every community person, every family has to be involved and take up that responsibility. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, under the able and caring stewardship of the beloved Prime Minister, we are building resilience and taking the necessary measures, brick by brick, block by block, sector by sector, community by community, households by household, to ensure that we position ourselves to mitigate risks and adverse effects of disaster and increase our resilience against the onslaught of climate change impacts. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, as every caring, concerned, and conscious Dominican should, I support this resolution for the authorization for the disaster risk management policy with a catastrophe deferred option. I thank you.
Yes, member, what we could do when a member stands up, when you press the speaking icon with the person on it, it will be showing green. Until I actually allow you to speak, it won't get red. Yeah, so you don't have to be pressing it over and over. So we have some control there. Yes. So that's why, so you see I'm very relaxed. Yeah, very relaxed because I have complete control. So yes, member. Through the system, yeah. Yeah. Okay, now.
Relax. Also, you're not controlling things. Mr. Speaker, I rise. And before I go further into anything, I must say all of us here, including us on this side, know that Dominica has been affected and continue to be affected by a number of adverse events. And that is not something that we do not know. And we are not just there and doing nothing, because I'm hearing every time that you all don't know anything, you all don't do anything, you all don't plant a tree, you all do nothing. But, Mr. Speaker, I maybe will blow my trumpet a little bit today. I will blow my trumpet a little bit tonight. Mr. Speaker, I worked during Tropical Storm Erica as the coordinator for volunteers, right? And before even that begun, I have been involved in disaster management training. I am right now a regional instructor for disaster management in the region. We do training as far as Bahamas, way down to Guyana. So it's not something new to us that we're not involved, that we don't know what we're talking about. We know what we're talking about, right? So when we talk about disaster management, risk management, vulnerability assessment, hazard assessment, we know what we're talking about. So it's nothing new. So you all sit on the other side, and the word that you use is ridicule. Yeah, because the same thing you all were doing us, all you. Okay? But the
yes,
members on this side. Members on this side.
Honorable members.
Honorable members on the other side. Okay. Right? I don't know, we seem to have a special something in us, Mr. Speaker, that makes everybody exciting when we speak out. You know, you all can agree. You know, the honorable members on this side always listens to us and tells us that we ridicule. But if we ask a genuine question, Mr. Speaker, we are not ridiculing anybody. We want to understand issues in order to accept it, in order to support it. And everybody knows, all of the honorable members on the other side knows. Mr. Speaker, I would have loved to have seen grant funding. And I welcome the intervention by the member for Solihull. And I was looking at the area on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and what the parties agreed to. These are the developed countries, to assist the developing countries financially.
Remember, you have to guide me. You were saying that you wanted to see grant, because I know it's a resolution.
Yeah,
seeking.
I'm saying I know it's a resolution, but we're borrowing money. But I would have preferred that we could have gotten some grant funding, so we don't have to repay loans, which would be an added burden to us. So, because we have the mechanisms are there, we have the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the developed parties agreed to certain things. And one of the areas they agreed to was the provision of financial support to manage the country's resources, to ensure that you are given the full increment cost for implementing measures that are covered, and also commitment to the importance of appropriate burden sharing among developed countries. The need for adequacy and predictability, that is what Dominica signed on to at the, well, if you all sign on words and you didn't know what you signed, that's up to you. United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, you all ratified conventions. When you ratify conventions, you have to know what conventions you ratify and what it means. So if you can draw down, you draw down. Mr. Speaker, relax. It's excitement, I don't know why. Relax. Mr. Speaker, in April of 2020, on the 29th to be exact, The Caribbean heads of states and finance ministers met with ECLAC, executive, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. You knew that? Well, good for you, my brother. The executive secretary, in her summation, after she heard from the heads of government, COVID and other debts, she said, and I quote, "Borrowing is not the answer to confront this crisis. Caribbean countries need grant support fast." And she was referring to COVID, pandemic efforts, debt relief, disasters. Relax, Dairo. I want to endorse that statement too, Mr. Speaker. I want to endorse that statement. Because you can well understand, putting aside everything that you all think, that these members think that grant funding would be better, and the grant funding is available for us to get. Mr. Speaker, remembering that the loans have to be repaid, and we also need to know that we have the mechanisms in place for the productive sector in order to pay back those loans. Because as I said earlier in the first intervention, that we do not want to have a burden for the next generation to pay. That would affect us adversely. Mr. Speaker, we came to this honorable house about 2 parliaments ago, and we agreed to borrow $35,533,000 to fund disaster vulnerability, which is the DVRP project. And under the resolution, we had an area, improved hazard data collection and monitoring systems. That was part of the resolution. Mr. Speaker, through you, I'm going to ask various questions to see where we are at. Are there monitoring systems in place? Technical equipment suited to our local conditions and circumstances? Yes, in Lai River. Suited to our local conditions and circumstances, in place, and personnel are trained in its use and maintenance. We have monitoring data, we receive monitoring data, and it is available in real time or near real time. That is important, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, are there warning devices in place? We have the early warning systems. What are the early warning systems that we have? Mr. Speaker, please, could I have some peace? Relax, relax. I'm asking through Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, but you see, is the way you phrase it. You ask, you are actually asking as you are debating.
Mr. Speaker.
So they are saying yes. So, but I cannot tell, I'm not going to say how to debate. Before,
no, you will not tell me.
No.
Tell us how to
Members have complained
and
said that I shouldn't tell him what to do.
It is fine. It's fine. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hope that the warning systems are in place, that they are subjected to tests and exercises, that we have had simulation exercises. I want to know when there was, because I never heard of one. Simulation exercises. Mr. Speaker. Yes, if you make sure that it's equipped with the requisite resources, because I know it is not equipped. Processes established to verify that warnings will reach the principal stakeholders and people at risk. Yes. Because the war you have in the Layu Center, relax. Are there institutional? I withdraw, Mr. Speaker.
Just focus on your speech because it's unparliamentary.
In place. Is ODM fully operational? Do we have staffing in ODM? Mr. Speaker, I have gone to the various islands in the Caribbean, in St. Lucia, Antigua. They are fully staffed at the Office of Disaster Management. Granted, they have different names. What is the staff component at the ODM? All this speaks to resiliency and response in the event of an adverse event. Is it fully resourced? Do we have whatever it takes in order, when an adverse event happens, that it will happen? What about the community disaster management committees? Are they in place? I heard some training has gone. And Mr. Speaker, you will know that in a community, especially when you do not have access, let's look at Hurricane Maria, that the community people become the first responders. So they need to be trained. And it pertains to the intensity or the magnitude of the event, the community has to respond, and they need the requisite resources. Are they trained? Mr. Speaker. These communities should not be infiltrated by parliamentary representatives and allow the officers to do their community work. Let the community disaster management committees work independently so they can do a proper job. Let the process work. Let the officers mandated to do their job sans interference.
You have to interpret what you mean by sir.
Sans, S-A-N-S, without. It is English. It's an English dictionary.
No, when I took it in the context of Creole.
Comprehensive disaster management legislation, has it been approved? National disaster plan, has it been outdated? We're talking legal framework. Put the measures in place and stop coming to the house and telling us that all is well. All is not well. You have community disaster plans. Have the plans been activated? How do you know that the plans work if you never test them? What are the resources that are put in place? When you identify the risks, you identify the hazards, you make an assessment of the vulnerability in the communities, the gaps that are created. How do you manage those gaps? Have we been able to do so to make the communities resilient and to make sure our people are less vulnerable to the impacts of those adverse events? Simulation exercises, you need to develop those, implement it, to constantly rehearse and test those plans. Not just one thing that is happening in Laos now. You need simulation exercises and tests all over the country. Because if all our members stood up and talk about how vulnerable we are to certain hazards. Mr. Speaker, I heard the member for Collyho speak to, she has 2 exits and 2 access. I was happy to hear it. I prayed that the people in Dalis would have that same thing too. By the reopening of the Dalis Supiti Savan Road, that would create access for them in the event. Mr. Speaker, not too very long, last 2 weeks, in the dry weather, you had rain and the Rosalie River overflowed banks. The people couldn't go across, and there were slides at the back. They were like rainstorm. If you heard the story of rainstorm, you couldn't go up, she couldn't go down. Right? So we need adequate funding. Yes, we can talk about all this well, but these are measures that we need to put in place, and we'll have to look at the communities. Not just the surface thing that it is a perfect utopia that everything is well. Everything is not well. If we go to the communities, you will realize that the communities need assistance, Mr. Speaker. We need adequate funding for disaster management. We need to improve the capabilities of disaster and emergency personnel. And we need to put measures to protect and sustain the environment. Mr. Speaker, I refer to the CRRP. Okay, they're exciting, it's fine. Exciting. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, measures to protect and sustain the natural and other unique assets. I refer to the CRRP. If you go on page 2, not page 2 in Roman numerals, you have the 6 resource areas. And with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to read 6, which is protected and sustainably leveraged natural and other unique assets. And under that it says, reflects staying true to Dominica's Nature Island brand by valuing the unique assets of the country, maintaining a pristine environment, and carefully monetizing them to support the resilience agenda. It focuses on geological resources, fresh water, marine environment, lands and forests, as well as conceptually recognizing the value of Dominica's culture, history, and knowledge of resilience gained through recent events. Let us look at infrastructure development. Are they following this criteria to ensure that our environment remains pristine, our nature island remains what it is because we boast of our tourism sector, nature isle of the Caribbean, we wish to remain that way. We do not want at the end of the day, yes, we have infrastructure development, but at the end of the day, the cost to our environment and our natural resources is more than what we have gained. So, Mr. Speaker, I wish to say thank you. I support any resolution to ensure that we receive the full funding to help disaster management. But at the same time, as I said, I would love to see grant funding instead, so we don't have to burden our generation to come with loans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on two fronts. One as the Minister of the Environment, and also as a proud First Nations person. Two fronts, and they're interlinked. And I hope at the end of this very, very brief intervention that you will understand and appreciate the importance of a resolution such as this one. And so I do support the authorization for a credit facility from the IDA for the financing of a disaster management development policy with a CAT DDO. Mr. Speaker, disaster risk management comprises measures that are closely linked with each other. These measures have to be taken before a natural disaster occurs. And so the aim is to limit or to avoid adverse impacts on our country. Mr. Speaker, when a hazardous event occurs, like Hurricane Maria, for instance, there's loss of life and there's damage to infrastructure. Disaster risk, therefore, really is the possibility of losing life, injury, or the destruction of our country's assets. Very, very important. Now, in a technical sense, we are looking at the combination of three terms: hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Mr. Speaker, we are on the front line of the war on climate change. And this is the reality that we face. This is not a cliche. It's the reality that we face. And we have faced this for millennia. Kainago people of African descent who came as a workforce in the region, and also the present generation of white Kubulians. But we have not allowed all of those interventions or disastrous events to cripple us. We have regrouped and we have embarked on a journey to become the world's first climate resilient nation. Mr. Speaker, we developed a national resilient development strategy and a climate resilient recovery plan with clear targets to be achieved by 2030. We have created a roadmap for our mitigation and adaptation goals. These focus on building strong communities, a robust economy, and well-planned and durable infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, we have continued to ensure that at the government level, and this is where this resolution is so important, that resilience becomes part of our daily activities. We are ensuring that it is reflected in our legislation, in our policies, in our sector plans, and also in our strategies. We are working with communities to ensure that weaknesses are identified and appropriate action takes place to minimize risks. Mr. Speaker, we have prioritized building a robust economy. This focuses on key elements of skill development, access to finance, diversification of revenue streams, and risk transfer. Hence, Mr. Speaker, the importance of this resolution. For a brief moment, we spoke about the UNFCCC, Senator Joseph. I made very, very clear at COP26 last year, and I spoke very candidly about the position of small island developing states and the impacts that inaccess to finance was making things very, very difficult. And I made it very clear that our young people have faced an unprecedented threat. They will inherit what I call a free or a triple jeopardy of one, crippling debt, a degraded global environment, and 3, frequent and very destructive disasters. It's very, very clear. Seeds have high levels of debt distress, primarily linked to responding to climate impacts. And currently, there is no viable long-term debt reduction strategy. Yet, seed still receives less than 2% of all climate financing. A very, very clear statement to the world saying that they have to basically put their money where their mouth is. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we speak, we have our new building codes. We have ensured that the new infrastructure is being built, the roads, the homes, the bridges, schools, and the schools are built to resilient standards. Mr. Speaker, even as we speak, our second national determined contributions report to the UNFCCC is completed. Mr. Speaker, our government has committed to building 5,000 resilient homes, and we are well on the way to achieving this. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, 500 of these will be built within the humble Carnago space, which I am humbled to serve. And as we speak, more than 50 of those are being funded by the European government, and more than 100 of those are being funded under the Government of Dominica Housing Recovery Project, commonly coined, incorrectly so, the World Bank Housing Project. Mr. Speaker, our new East Coast Road is being done under the cost of $126 million, a loan from the World Bank. I don't want to commend the work done by the previous ministers, yourself included, and also Minister Dairo, and that more than 79 million of that amount of money will be spent in the Carnago space, and to take in consideration the first ever proper compensation of lands, and also the compensation of crops within that particular space. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are weatherproofing our country from the impacts of climate change. And even while we speak, Mr. Speaker, we have a serious situation, not just on the land space. We do have issues to deal with in the marine space. Or just down south of the coast of Sophia and Scott's Head, we have a coral issue. And we have to deal with this. It started in Florida in 2014, and it has filtered down to the Caribbean region. And we have to deal with this. That's why a resolution is so important, because we have to be ready in the event that the relevant leadership will show of how do we proceed to deal with that situation. And so while we deal with the forests and the lands that we see, we also have to look at what's happening in the marine life. And so it's very, very important to look at these issues here. Mr. Speaker, we have really approached the entire movement for climate resilience in a holistic manner. To ensure that our youth and the future generations that I'm proud to serve at this time will enjoy a reasonable standard of living. Mr. Speaker, this resolution here is yet another major step to building our resilience. And I want to, in the final analysis, say that I do support the authorization for a credit facility from the IDA for the financing of disaster risk management development policy with a CAD DDO. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to make my contribution on the resolution before the House for debate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we heard a lot of different perspectives, but one of the perspectives that we have not touched is the human disasters. And that is one of the, under this resolution. Yes, Mr. Speaker, you're talking about, the resolution says, Mr. Speaker, Dominica is highly vulnerable to natural disasters, climate impacts, pandemics, endemics, and whatnot. Right there, Mr. Speaker, we're speaking about the infrastructural resilience of our country. And all the discussion is wrong, and I welcome the intervention of the Minister of the Environment. he has broadened the discussion, and that's what I'd like to see on both sides have a very constructive debate. But, Mr. Speaker, the area that we have not touched, and I will bring to that discussion, last year, when we were in this house, I raised the concerns about indiscriminate dumping on the road from from Poncasset to Pegua. And I raised some eyebrows. The minister took notes, the Minister of Public Works, I remember that, about the indiscriminate dumping of waste material along that road. And we welcome the repairs on the road. As we heard the member of parliament from the Catastrophe area, they have to take up the response, they waiting and they make sure that they have a proper road and that they will take the hustle for the time being, we understand that. But what we are saying, if we are speaking about ensuring that when we repair these roads, we will cause damage, unnecessary damage, human damage, and that is what is happening. The Belfry River was an issue, and some of the dumpings along the road. Mr. Speaker, we have seen that across the country, and that is a serious concern. And as we speak about ensuring that we have these resources that we can go to, but we have to in turn prevent some of them from happening. This morning, I welcomed the intervention by the Member of Parliament for the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Member of Parliament for Petit Savan. And he made mention of what happened after Erica. And the Honorable Minister, that is Honorable Daru, made mention about what transpired after Erica in his constituency and what was done. They had buildings, they moved the people to Tisavan, to Belleville and also part of Granby in the Geneva area because of the disaster risk they had down there. Mr. Speaker, we heard the member for the Collier constituency made mention she welcomed the intervention in Collier, and we welcome that as well. Yes, you're not going to Kulibistri. What has happened to Kulibistri? We are going to our 7th hurricane season, and nothing has been done in Kulibistri. Only thing we did in Kulibistri was dredging after the hurricanes. Since that time, we have not done anything to protect lives and properties, Mr. Speaker. We heard about the walls in Collier, and I welcome the walls. I passed Collier, I saw the walls being built in Collier. Welcome it. Welcome the walls in other areas. We heard the Member of Parliament for the Calibishi constituency made mention of the sea defense wall. We have been asking for a river wall in Kulibistri. We heard about relocation of some of the people in Kulibistri, and nothing has been done. People of Kulibistri. And these are the areas we have to look at. We are approaching a new hurricane season come Wednesday. We have not dredged Collier. What is the plans for, Kulibistri? We have Kulibistri, Main River, and Lagoon Bay. There's a young man that met me yesterday, and he told me to bring up in Parliament. He's trying to get a loan to repair his mom's house in Collier, in Kulibistri, on the Lagoon Bay part. And he cannot get the loan because they see his area has been vulnerable. So he's living in a house that he wants to repair for his mom. But he cannot do that because the area is vulnerable. And the lack of dredging make it worse because you have the heavy rainfall and the flooding, the water from Mount Ratchet as well add to it. So these are the areas, Mr. Speaker, we'd like to see addressed in this type, when we get this type of resources to ensure that we protect lives and properties. Mr. Speaker, this morning, the Minister of Tourism spoke highly about Dominica being the nature island of the Caribbean, promoting her longest cable to the Boiling Lake, new flights coming to Dominica. All that is important. But if you lose the natural resources that you have, you cannot promote Dominica as a natural, the nature island anymore. And Mr. Speaker, let us stick to our longest river in Dominica, the Layu River. And I want the Member of Parliament for St. Joseph, the Member of Parliament for Granby, who's from the West Coast as well, the Minister of the Minister of the Environment, and others in that area to let us look at the river and the Minister of Tourism as well. The Lai River, how important it is. The road is being constructed. We welcome that road from the Lai Bridge to Ponkasi. But we have a serious problem right now with the indiscriminate dumping of waste material on the banks of the Lai River. Where is that going? Oh yes, and I forget the Senator Roll. Senator Roll is from Lai. His dad used that, has his company that utilize that river. You have Wacky Rollers, you have Fonson Inc. That's where they bring the tourists to take the river tubing. And all concrete and steel was dumped on that site. The people in the area raised that concern, but it was covered. Instead of removing it, it was covered. Concrete is not going to go down the river like a log. So maybe go inside and you don't know what can happen in terms of river tubing, who can get injured and whatnot. You have down the road, you have the people of Layu. The Titiwe Festival comes every September. That can affect that income stream to the community. But in the past couple of days and weeks, what have we heard? How are we going to address that situation? And I brought that in because we have the common denominator in both areas. I will not call it one foreign contractor. And we are not doing anything about it. That foreign contractor will never do that in Guadeloupe. And we know that. But no one is saying a word. Everybody's quiet. That is a serious concern to our environment, a serious concern to our livelihood, a serious concern to our tourism product. And we are in the hurricane season. And that should have been addressed already. Hurricane Maria, the Matye Dam, Tropical Storm Erica went down. And we had the Cocoa boxing plant, Hillsborough boxing plant, that was washed away by the river. A boxing plant that was there for several decades, it was washed away. So the river will do anything. Not when you put loose steel and concrete on the side of the riverbank and cover it with sand. Every Sunday, and it's Sunday, you go up the Lai River, they're full of people. Dominicans socializing in, going there and enjoying themselves. And we are not doing anything to ensure that there is safety, to ensure that the tourism business of Senator Roll and the others, his parents, continue. Brothers and sisters, members of parliament, you are with the government on the government side. The Minister of Public Works is also there. You maybe have the ears of the foreign contractor. Can we get that out as soon as possible? On behalf of the people of Dominica, on our longest river, most respected river. We're talking about our sustainable development goals as well. There's several areas of our sustainable development goals in just that Lai River area that have been affected. You're talking about sustainable development goal number 3, good health and well-being, being the pollution, people is at risk, income being affected. Number 6, clean water and sanitation. The Lai River, we want our river to continue to be clean and pristine. Number 8, decent work and economic growth. River tubing, as I mentioned, the different activities that income generating in that area. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. We want Lai to continue to be a sustainable community. The Lai community, they're downstream. We have to protect these areas. And the climate, number 13, climate action, and number 14, life below water. And you just heard the minister raise the concern that we have our risks along the west coast are being affected, and all the silt and everything going down to that to the sea is affecting them as well. So these are concerns, genuine concerns that we should be aware of, and we should raise. How are we going to achieve those goals, or sustainable development goals by 2030, when we are in decade of action, and our best action right now is our inaction? Right? And Mr. Speaker, we also had a concern recently, a leaked letter, we saw it, that came from an employee of the Forestry Division, or the concern there is in the Poncassi area to do with our emerald pool. There's another concern, and the Tarish pit. I remember going to that area when I was a little boy, and that Tarish pit had been there by the public, been managed by the Public Works, and also working within the guidelines of the Forestry and Wildlife Division and protecting our resources. That has to be looked at as well. One of our biggest issues that we have right now on these projects is that the monitoring and supervision is lacking. And monitoring, supervision, and reporting is lacking. I don't know if it's through the Ministry of Public Works or Land and Surveys, Forestry and Wildlife. I think there should be a proper networking to ensure that we can work together to mitigate these situations in these areas and make it a bit, to protect our environment and our resources that help bring income generating areas. Mr. Speaker, food security plays a very vital role around that time in terms of the hurricane season and mitigating thing. And access to our farms is critical as well. I welcome the intervention that monies has been expanded in some areas. I heard of the Kokoye in Kalibishi and some other areas. The Salisbury, and I'm saying that, and I want to bring in and tie in my good friend, the parliamentary representative for the St. Joseph constituency, Honorable King, that the road in the height of Salisbury, the Salisbury Heights Road, is not only for Salisbury. I want to raise that concern as well again. Why? You don't have the access to Cuba Road and no more through Layu area. That's the only road you can access to go to Kahome. That's where the land of the St. Joseph community, a lot of people go through the area. But the road is in a terrible condition, and now we are approaching the hurricane season. We have not done any maintenance of that farm access road. That is where the communities of Salisbury, St. Joseph, Meru, Layu, even as far as Maho, go up to their farms. And I'm calling on the members of parliament in the area, let us come together and see how we can address that farm access road, because we cannot go through Layu Park, through Cuba Road right now because of what transpired during Maria, but just to get that road going, because food security plays a very vital role in our addressing our sustainable development goals, and to also ensure that we have some income generating, not only for the people of Salisbury, but on the West Coast at large. Mr. Speaker, one other area I would like to touch as well in Kulibistri that is very important, just to give support to the contribution by the Minister for the Environment. The Kulibistri area got affected by Maria and Erica. We have not built the river walls and things. But something I made that recommendation some time ago, is that to go on a replanting drive in some of the communities, not Kulibistri alone, but along the river banks, where you can bring back the mangoes, coconut trees, and these things in the area that will help or create a buffer for a river, so you can help save the rivers as well, and also bring in plant back some exotic fruits in the communities. That's what we had before. In almost all the communities along the river had mango trees, coconut trees, soursop trees along that river. So if you bring that into Kulibistri to help, as I said, protect lives and properties. Also, as I said as well, during the summer, during the dry spells, communities like Kulibistri is very dusty. Very dusty. Now we are moving to the hurricane season. I would encourage, I don't have the seeds from the Ministry of Agriculture, that you can get seeds for grass to plant in the area, throw them in around Kulibistri. So during the rainy season, you'll get them growing, and then during the summer, you'll help hold on the dust in the Kulibistri area. And the Kulibistri area, some other areas that is very dusty because of Erica and all the dredging and Maria, all the dredging, you've had that happening. I just wanted to bring that type of intervention here that component of it. We are speaking about getting the money and what can be done and what we see about it, but we have other areas that needs to be addressed and also will help us move forward in this action decade and of obtaining our sustainable development goal. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of clarification, but while I am on my feet, I wish to pledge my unwavering support to the resolution, authorization for credit facility from the International Development Association for financing of a disaster risk management development policy with catastrophe deferred option. Mr. Speaker, while I am satisfied with the overwhelming support, at least on our side, to this resolution, I felt initially that there was no need to add my voice. Notwithstanding, I heard some misinformation being delivered or being reported to the House.
But before you proceed, I just wanted to correct something. There is no point of clarification in a standing order. You're just clarifying something. Yeah, yes, you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this assertion was in relation to events occurring at the Lai River. Mr. Speaker, this project falls within the confines of the Ministry of Public Works and Digital Economy. This is a project that we have embarked on to build a road from the Hillsborough Bridge to the York Valley Bridge, a 4-kilometer roadway project costing near 12 million Eastern Caribbean dollars, a significant project, Mr. Speaker, a project that benefits the people not only of the Layu communities, but people who connect from the western part of the communities along Dominica to the eastern parts, to the, Mr. Speaker, and the central parts. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Public Works was referred to in this, as reported by Honorable Hector John, and he said that nothing is being done to correct the actions that are undergoing right now in this area. Nothing is being done to protect the businesses, the tourist businesses in this area. And Mr. Speaker, this, I wish to state, is furthest from the truth. Mr. Speaker, as a responsible ministry, we have adopted the practice, Mr. Speaker, of ensuring that with the commencement of each and every one of our projects, we conduct an environmental and social impact assessment, and that was done. And not only that, from this ESIA, Mr. Speaker, an environmental management plan was developed. This was developed for and on behalf of the contractor on this project, and that is being closely monitored each and every day by an environmental and safety officer who is assigned full-time to this project, Mondays through Fridays, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, if it were requested at any time, we could request that document, that log that we keep on site with any incident, any occurrence, any malpractice that occurs on this site. Mr. Speaker, down to basic nuances or situations of an excavator having a minor leak, an oil leak. This is logged, this is reported, the time, the date, the extent, and even when corrective action is taken. As it relates to the particular incident that is reported of illegal dumping, it is, in fact, illegal dumping. But Mr. Speaker, I wish to state, though, that this incident was brought to our attention on Saturday, May 22nd. It should be noted, notwithstanding, on the day before, Friday afternoon, on the 20th, a walkthrough was done jointly with the Ministry of Public Works representatives, the contractor as well, and the CDB representative on the project, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Minister, just 1 second. Members brought up certain matters. The Honorable Minister is actually responding, and we're actually speaking with each other while he's speaking. So, Honorable Minister, continue.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, on that very day, that Friday afternoon, as part of the walkthrough, there was a particular site where a generator house was demolished. And as part of the rubble, there was concrete and there was rebar in the rubble. And the agreement on site in the engineer's instruction was to leave that rubble in place within the confines of that generator house, which was demolished. Mr. Speaker, based on the reports that I have before me, it appears that that rubble was transported to a particular area along the riverbanks, and that which we observed to take place by way of a video that was on social media. Mr. Speaker, let it be known that the approved hours, Mr. Speaker, for work on that particular project does not include Saturdays. So the suggestion that we would have allowed that or we would have supported that is furthest from the truth. It is not correct. Mr. Speaker, further to that, with investigations, we invited Ministry of Environment to the site, and on that very Saturday, the environmental health monitors came to site as well to investigate the matter. Mr. Speaker, the responsible authorities that we are, we not only accepted what we saw, but we went further to dig test pits along the river banks, Mr. Speaker, to find out, to inquire whether any rubble would have been buried and would have been unseen to the eye. Mr. Speaker, an instruction was given by our supervising engineers that supported also by the environmental monitors to remove the rubble with immediate effect. Engineers' instruction was given to the contractor, and immediately the contractor commenced the removal of this material. Further to that, the instruction stated that the rebar should be separated from the concrete, and instruction was given as to where to dump at the landfill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as per the environmental management plan, everything is listed. Every dump site is listed and approved, and that which occurred was not approved. It was not accepted by the ministry, and we have written a very stern letter to request immediate corrective action. Mr. Speaker, we continue to monitor this project very closely. We take these matters of the environment, health and safety very seriously, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to do our best to monitor and to preserve the sanctity of the environment, Mr. Speaker. We don't play games with the environment, Mr. Speaker. We are aware that the Lai River is the longest river and the widest river, Mr. Speaker, in our island. That we take very seriously. So we'll continue to do our best, Mr. Speaker, and to take all the actions required to ensure that all the environmental safeguards are preserved while this project continues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see my good friend and neighbor making me a sign. Perhaps it's time that I should remain seated since it's already late. But, Mr. Chair, it would be remiss of me not to add my voice in support of this resolution, the authorization for credit facility from the International Development Association, IDA, for financing of disaster risk management development policy with a catastrophe deferred drawdown option, the CAT DDO. Mr. Speaker, but before I proceed, I know that Standing Order 41.8 allows me the opportunity to refer to my notes and to publications. But like this resolution before us, the CAT DDO, I wish to get some insurance from you that I could refer to my notes and perhaps read by virtue of the fact that I am the minister responsible for climate resilience. So I beg your leave, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, permission granted.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't intend to present as planned, but I think after listening to the debate, I may have to bore my colleagues and beg their indulgence for maybe 20 minutes or so. I will not be able to keep the pace of Minister Alfred and the hard-hitting presentation she gave earlier, as well as my colleague and friend, the Member of Parliament of Roseau South, and the other colleagues who make their contribution. But Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind us that after the devastation of Hurricane Maria, almost 5 years ago, our Prime Minister went before the world and declared a commitment to all of us in Dominica that never again will we see that kind of devastation brought onto Dominica by a hydrometeorological event like a hurricane. And he there committed to make Dominica the first climate resilient nation in the world. Now, some people are seeking to ridicule, make some snide remarks, and, think that it is something that is not attainable. But I have news for you. We have a plan. We didn't just make a commitment and sit on our laurels. We got up and decided we have to work. And I will also add that this is a continuation of work that started decades ago. And we heard reference of it. The low carbon resilience strategy, that was since 2012. But what was missed this morning by the presentation of members of the opposition is that it was from 2012 to 2020. But by 2020, here's what we've done. We developed or created CREED, the Climate Resilience Executing Agency of Dominica. CREED then went on to prepare our national resilience and development strategy. So we went ahead and said, we take that big vision that the Prime Minister gave us, that mission that we decided to embark upon, and give life into it, to create a strategy that will help us attain those goals. We didn't stop there, because after all, that's just a strategy. We need to then move on to reduce it to what is called our Climate Resilience and Recovery Plan, the CRRP. So that what we have done in that document is to give more commitments towards 2030 so that we can truly make Dominica a climate resilient nation. Mr. Speaker, the CRRP is a comprehensive document. It's holistic, it's multifaceted, multidimensional, takes into account every aspect of life, every aspect of survival, every aspect of our existence on this nature isle with regards to climate change and developing resilience to the impact of climate change. But it has three main pillars. One, climate resilient systems, covering a wide range of systems and processes that have the capacity to adjust to and absorb the impacts of climate change. So what we're talking about is things like building a robust financial system, a system that is able to respond to the impact of any event brought about by climate change. Prudent disaster risk management. And I heard, Senator, I must commend you for your presentation. Well rehearsed, well prepared, wrong country, unfortunately. Because what you said is what perhaps would have applied a decade or two ago, or maybe some other country, some other place, not in Dominica. Because Dominica has one of the most robust system of disaster management and preparedness. And why is that so? Because our Prime Minister doesn't joke. He doesn't joke when it comes to that. And this is why a lot of people don't understand why we're able to, every time we hit, we're able to clear the road so quickly. We're able to mobilize so quickly because we trigger NEPO. We make the arrangements that have to be done long before the season. So by the time, and I don't want to do like the opposition and bring the speaker into the debate, but I see him smiling because I know he's aware of that, he's familiar with that. And that we know we all have to do our part and get the machinery rolling. But here's the thing, news for you, and go back to the 2012-2020 Low Carbon Resilience and Development Strategy, and you will see it calls for the construction of regional centers for disaster management. And in 2022, we opened the 2 biggest regional centers for disaster management in Dominica District. One in Casa Bruce at 13 million EC dollars, and one in Jimmet at 18 million EC dollars, sorry. So we are doing what is necessary. 3, the effective disaster response and recovery. And this is what we're talking about. So we want to minimize the time it takes us to recover, and hence one of the reasons why we're here discussing this resolution. Because we need to ensure that we have the ability to respond. We have set 20 key resilience targets to be achieved by 2030 that focus on 1, enhancing the overall socioeconomic development trajectory of the island. 2, reducing the impact of climatic and other shocks. And 3, minimizing the time to recover from these events. Mr. Speaker, most of us, if not all of us, were in Dominica during the passage of Tropical Storm Erica. You may recall that after Erica, your government said, we will build back better. Remember that? That's what we said. 2015, after we got hit, we shook ourselves up and decided, you know what? We cleared all the roads, we did what we had to do, and we made the commitment that we are going to build back better. That meant that all infrastructure that we would build, whether schools, roads, bridges, hospitals, houses, would be made more resilient. And we are getting there. But that wasn't enough for us. We would build stronger and better. And we did that, Mr. Speaker. And we can see that after the passage of Hurricane Maria, thank God, those infrastructures that we built after Erica, they withstood Maria. We saw that right here in Roseau. We saw that again in parts of Dominica where we had constructed, especially Bellevue. But you know, Mr. Speaker, after Hurricane Maria, we realized that we needed to approach resilience in a more comprehensive manner. Not just ensuring that we had resilient infrastructure, but we needed to have economic, social, environmental, and financial resilience. So what we are doing here today is not a piecemeal thing. It is part of a greater whole. It is part of a holistic, coherent strategy to ensure that we can build resilience. Because part of building resilience is being able to have the financial resources. Resilience to us means minimizing losses and being able to recover more quickly post-disaster. But you know, we have to accept that no matter what we do, we can build resilient houses, as many as we can, ensure that we have roads that are now safer. We can ensure that we have telecommunication systems that allow us to communicate, and we can do all what we can, energy and everything. But we have to accept that we cannot eliminate totally the impact of climate change. There will always be some impact. But thank God, if we get hit again by a system say, at the strength of a Category 5 as Maria was, we don't expect to see, one, the kind of damage, and two, being off the grid. That is to say, taking so long to recover. Because we have built into our infrastructure more resilience. Mr. Speaker, we were fortunate after Hurricane Maria, and I was there. I was there, thank God, I had the opportunity. I remember I came home 2 days before Hurricane Maria, and Minister Douglas, I remember I went all the way to Portsmouth to bring a document for him to sign. We were getting a grant of about $5 million US from the UAE Caribbean Renewable Energy Fund, because I had just gotten back from Abu Dhabi at that meeting, and I got that approval, and I was anxious to get him to sign that document. At the time, he was Minister of Energy. And we signed that document. I placed it in my office at home, and it went with Maria. I came home just 2 days before. We had a team from the World Bank who were anxious to get our geothermal project going, and they got caught at the Fort Young Hotel. And then sometimes people ask you why these things are delayed, why all these things. Because we had a hurricane called Maria. Some people seem to conveniently forget that. But Mr. Speaker, what I must say is that we were fortunate after Hurricane Maria to have had significant funds in the Treasury. Remember, it was September. You didn't even start using the money you had just approved in the budget, you know? So funds that were there set aside for projects that were ready to be implemented had to be diverted to recovery and response. But I say, thank God, we had money in the Treasury. Because what most people may not be aware of is that perhaps 80% of the relief supplies, we paid for them. We paid for them. The Prime Minister was able to authorize expenditure through the FS, of course, the Financial Secretary, and to procure food supplies. I remember those containers of food supplies that we brought down to Dominica prior to getting any relief from any agency or bilateral partners. Because we were able to have those resources. And hence the reason why it's important to have this facility. Because we want to ensure that we do not compromise projects that all people are depending on. God forbid we get hit by a major disaster. We want to ensure that we can continue implementing our projects, but at the same time, responding to the impact of any major event. Mr. Speaker, we today are fortunate, and that is to say, because of what we have done in building resilience, especially financial resilience. So an important part of our resilience is having disaster resilience strategy, and we developed a strategy with support of the IMF, and that was approved by Cabinet last year. I think sometime last year that strategy was approved. The strategy is a comprehensive plan that includes policies, cost, and financing to build resilience against disasters. It is organized around pillars of structural resilience, financial resilience, and post-disaster resilience. But all of this is, resilience is really for one main reason. We try to protect lives. We don't have to say that, but that's why you do it. You don't need to spell it out. I think the member for Salisbury was at pains trying to understand why we're not talking about the human part of resilience. But that is what resilience is for, is really to protect people. We then developed a disaster risk financing strategy, which is aligned with the disaster resilience strategy. It focuses on the development of a comprehensive financing strategy with a risk layering framework, operationalizing the Vulnerability Risk Reduction Fund, and strengthening the private insurance market. So what we've done really is just to say that government is placing $500,000 per month in our vulnerability fund, precisely to ensure that we have rainy day fund that we can go to when disaster strikes. So rather, we're not creating the fund just to have the money there. It's so that we can buy food, we can ensure that there's water, we can ensure that people have supplies, they have shelter, they have medication, that the country continues to operate and to protect lives and livelihoods. That's why we have all of these facilities. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, We recognize that after disaster, there is need for a huge injection of cash to respond. We therefore need to have the appropriate fiscal buffers and pre-arrange financial instruments to help with the cost of immediate response, recovery, and reconstruction. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that even with all of the resilient roads, bridges, homes that we have built and are building, we cannot totally eliminate losses. So Hurricane Maria cost loss and damage of over $3 billion EC dollars. You will appreciate that to respond to that, you need a lot of money. So this 20 million US dollars we're talking about is really just a drop in the bucket if, God forbids, that we're hit by an event with the devastation close to Hurricane Maria's. But we have had the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, and I think that is something to mention, because I don't want people to get the impression that we come into Parliament now, and it's the first time that we're having such a facility. The nature of this one is slightly different. We are contracting a loan in advance and defer the drawdown until, God forbids, we need it. It does not become a burden on the state unless it is utilized, but it is there. So we don't have to negotiate during the aftermath of a major event. So it's there. But we have had, since 2007, we have been part of the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, the CRIF. And the CRIF has been there to respond after a major event. But the amount is not much. It's only about 20 million US dollars. We got it after the passage of Hurricane Maria. And my friend, Senator from the other side, I remember her name well. I'm not familiar. Oh, Joseph. Senator Joseph. You know, the truth is, we have those facilities to ensure, and we go to the UN, and we know that people make commitments. Because you're the one who said we're not going for the money. So, isani lanja check kote, mun ka ba mun eva nu pa kale pou sa nou den.
You have to interpret.
Boy, I saw go there. Grand Bay. Mr. Speaker, there is no way there will be money available somewhere, and we will not go to get for our people. It's just not so you get the interpreted, son. That's how it's off where we see. You know, I mean...
Interpret again.
Boy, Ray, I go, boy.
I
will stop hanging with them
well,
fellas.
Eventually...
I will stop hanging with them fellas in Lally.
No, we'll deal with this standing order in which we make Creole. Yeah, Creole. Yes.
No, okay. I don't know how to translate that one.
We'll deal with it.
But Mr. Speaker, so I can strike it. But Mr. Speaker, I mean, you know the old saying, if it was so easy, it would have been done. I mean, there's no way. I'm talking about, and you see, boy, a little bit of information is a dangerous thing, you know. I used to hear people saying a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. You know, when we read things and we hear things, sometimes we get carried away, but until we understand those things. The UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there are commitments made. There was a commitment that they would capitalize the Green Climate Fund with $100 billion. To date, where are we? We went to all these international conferences. I was in Paris with the Prime Minister in 2015 after Rico. We went to Paris. We were at President Sarkozy's special summit on the environment and sustainable development. There were big commitments made. We've been pursuing this. I spent at least 10 years at the UN between pursuing these funds, not just for Dominica, but for seeds. So we know that not every commitment that is made that can be realized. But what we've done, and by the way, we've been calling for the recapitalization of this facility, the CRIF. We've asked for at least $5 billion for seeds.
10 more minutes.
Oh, okay. I'm getting there. No more time, thank you. But Mr. Speaker, it's good. I could run it. Mr. Speaker, this is where this instrument that we ask to approve today can contribute in a significant way to our fiscal resilience. And I said the risk fund that we have, the parametric insurance facility that we have, which basically covers impacts from tropical cyclones, earthquakes, excess rainfall, damage to the fisheries sector and the public utilities sector. That facility is available to us. But the CAT-DDO is a development policy loan offered by the World Bank. To date, several vulnerable countries like Dominica, countries vulnerable to the impact of climate change, that is, are participating in this financing option. The purpose of the CAT-DDO is to enhance the capacity of borrowers like Dominica to manage catastrophe risk, to provide immediate liquidity to fill the budget gap after a natural disaster, to safeguard ongoing development programs. Mr. Speaker, the CAT-DDO will allow Dominica to have immediate access to 52 million EC dollars after a natural disaster at a time when we will need it most. And that can be accessed as soon as we declare a state of emergency. All that is required is a phone call, an email, and it triggers the drawdown from that facility. Mr. Speaker, this is a forward-thinking government. This is a government that not only talks the talks, but walks the walk. When we say we are building a climate-resilient Dominica, we are working towards making Dominica resilient. We see it from the DVRP project on the East Coast Road with $125 million being invested to ensure that we can improve communication throughout the West Coast, the Kalinago Territory, and Atkinson. We soon will see work beginning on the Lubia to Bagatelle Road, going, of course, to Grand Bay first, and then to Bagatelle, being financed by the UK government for over $100 million. We are seeing an investment of about $85 million in water supply, water systems. We're ensuring that we can build resilient systems so that our people have access. We have invested in schools. We recently handed over the rehabilitated school in Dalis, $1.2 million. In Monjon, $1.4 million. In Marigot, for $2.4 million. And soon, in Granby, $3 million. Salisbury was done before in a different program, but we've also seen the refurbishment, the retrofitting of our health and wellness centers to make them climate smart, as we have in Granby and some other communities in Dominica. We have built a new Marigot Hospital, which is fully resilient, with water supply, alternative sources of power generation, and likewise, we are seeing, and soon we'll have the full handing over of the Dominica China Friendship Hospital. All of these things are being done as part of the overall strategy to build a resilient Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I support the resolution.
Mr. Speaker, I rise with your permission, Mr. Speaker, to wind up the debate on this very important resolution before this Honorable House, namely authorization for a credit facility from the International Development Association for financing of a disaster risk management development policy with a catastrophe deferred drawdown option. I note, Mr. Speaker, that the clerk will make the relevant change on the other people. Mr. Speaker, I listened to some members on the other side, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, something that should have been a very simple measure before this Honorable House created constructive to a certain extent discussion. And, but permit me, Mr. Speaker, to refer and to respond to some of the misinformation that was actually brought forward before this Honorable House, starting firstly with the Senator John Finn, Finn, sorry. Mr. Speaker, she referenced, and she said, over the years, nothing by way of mitigation, by way of preparedness, and disaster management have been taking place in this country. And one is very ironical. Why do I say that? Because the Honorable Senator comes from one of the most vulnerable communities in Dominica. On the vulnerable index of this country, Good Hope is the most vulnerable community. Then you have sons of it, but the Sophia Gambel. Now, Senator John Finn drives, when she comes to the house, I would imagine, from her home to Roseau, and travels on the East Coast Road, from Good Hope into Castle Bruce area and into Roseau. And Mr. Speaker, this government is spending $127 million EC dollars to totally reconstruct this road, and she does not see it. And Mr. Speaker, further, 173 culverts have been replaced as we speak. 43 returning walls have been reconstructed. 60 kilometers of drainage. We are moving from a carriageway, the width of the road, from 4.5 meters to 6.5 meters. In terms of physical mitigation, Mr. Speaker, what greater and more profound intervention one can ask for? She's not seeing that, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker, Senator Joseph, who in my mind made a very instructive intervention. She made reference about the need for a national disaster plan. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, through the instrumentality of SIDIMA, we have a consultant on island currently interviewing stakeholders to upgrade our national disaster plan. This is what the Labour Party is doing in mitigation, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, I would advise that the consultant interview Ms. Senator Joseph as a stakeholder, Mr. Speaker. Expert. Mr. Speaker, the member for Salisbury made reference to the human aspect of mitigation and preparedness. Mr. Speaker, one of the key things that we do in preparedness is to cater for the most vulnerable among our mix. Honorable Henderson, Doctor, the member for Granby, made reference to that. Mr. Speaker, I want to just reference some statistics there that speaks to what the Labour Party has done in terms of ensuring that the most vulnerable in our mix are put in a safe place, a shelter that is resilient. Mr. Speaker, pre-Maria, 7,600 people needed shelters. 7,600 people needed shelter, pre-Maria. Check this out now. The most devastating hurricane in the history of Dominica and the world by extension. We have moved from, Mr. Speaker, from 7,600 people requiring shelters to 3,700, Mr. Speaker. This was not by accident. This was because of deliberate planning, Mr. Speaker. So we have now a capacity in terms of shelter space of 8,200. That is what the Labour Party is doing. This was not by accident. Members before me made reference to the regional shelters / resource centers in Lyust, then Castle Bruce. I put Jimmy last, he's the biggest, incidentally. But also, the concentration of this government and this leader on the most marginalized, constructing homes, resident homes throughout the country. As a consequence, your house now is a shelter. So that's why we are down. We have more shelter spaces right now. Over 5,000 shelter spaces right now, Mr. Speaker. That is movement in the right direction, Mr. Speaker. It is. And we must talk about that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we must take into consideration, and when we are planning, in the event we have a disruption of the mainstream communication system, you know that happens often after a disaster. More so, we are more prone to hurricanes than anything else. We are investing heavily in two-way radio communications. It has a greater redundancy. And we are training as we speak a number of people at the community level. Mr. Speaker, just recently the Cabinet approved a national emergency telecommunication plan, Mr. Speaker. There are 17 targets to be achieved. And the Office of Disaster Management will be ensuring that those targets are achieved working, Mr. Speaker, with the relevant stakeholders. That is what Labour Party is doing. Before Labour Party, before Prime Minister Roosevelt carried, disaster preparedness and management and mitigation, it was a seasonal thing in this country. Now it's a year-round thing, Mr. Speaker. We are training, as we speak, from the community level, people in disaster management, communication, emergency communication, warehouse management, Mr. Speaker. That is fundamental when you're responding to a disaster, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, through the instrumentality of the Ministry of National Security and Home Affairs alone, for the past 2 years, we have spent $46.8 million improving our capacity to manage a disaster if we were to be faced by such eventuality. And they're saying nothing, Mr. Speaker. I know I live in Dominica, planet Earth. I ain't sure where Senator John Finn lives. In Jupiter? No, we live in Earth. Because these things are happening before our eyes. So the folks who are apparently living in an alternate universe, I'm Dominica. Are you? I think you are. Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, reference was made to the regional shelters in Jimmet and Castlebrooks. But one of the fundamental things, Mr. Speaker, you have people in the rural communities. And you have people, of course, the Godopes, the Karinago territory, etc. The northern part of the country, the second tongue. And you know, after a disaster, your response, of course, you have search and rescue, you have recovery. But of course, you have to ensure that there are critical supplies that must get to the people. So we're decentralizing the whole issue of warehousing, etc. Well, what we have done, alongside the regional shelters that we're building, Mr. Speaker, we just came from Castlebrooks, a wonderful place. I did not see the senator there celebrating. But added to that, we have constructed, it's completed, Mr. Speaker, an emergency operations center with the capacity we have a warehouse component to it, Mr. Speaker, costing $2.4 million in Castlebrooks again. So the people of Toronto, the people of Depa, etc., don't have to come to Rose or Portsmouth. Their supplies, their nana, will be there for them to eat right at the doorstep. That is what Labour Party is doing. Then we know, Mr. Speaker, nana is food. Yeah, okay? So we know, Mr. Speaker, now. In Portsmouth, the second town, we have people like coming from Dodan, etc., Vickers, Penville, and of course, Aquaib. My grandmother was from Aquaib. Okay? And so they don't have to think of trying to come to Roseau. We have just constructed and completed an emergency operations center with a component, a warehouse component, to the tune of $4.4 million, to be precise, Mr. Speaker. So your critical supplies, your food, etc., will be stored right at Cotton Hill. Not just alone, you know. All right. That is what the Dominican Labour Party is doing. Planning, working in mitigation, Mr. Speaker. That's what you're doing. But I'm surprised they're seeing it. I'm not surprised because they live in the next world, Mr. Speaker. So these are things that we're doing. Then, Mr. Speaker, in Capuchin, we're building capacity in communication again. We have an alternate solar power source costing $190,000. Every aspect of this country has been addressed insofar as disaster mitigation and preparedness is concerned. Why are they not saying that, Mr. Speaker? So I wanted to say these few things, Mr. Speaker, but I was just really, really concerned that the Senator, John Finn, did not see, or is not seeing, all she can see is the dust. It's dust. But she's not seeing there's a big box culvert being constructed. She's not seeing the big drains that are being constructed. 173 culverts, 43 returning walls, 60 kilometers of drainage, concrete drainage. Upakawesa. You're not seeing that, Mr. Speaker? And that's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend all the speakers who spoke before me, with a few exceptions. There are those, Mr. Speaker, who take this thing very seriously. There are those who spoke, especially bearing in mind we're just days away from the hurricane season, in the most flippant manner on a very important subject matter. That's why a lot of people saying, praise God, Labour is in office, eh? Can you imagine them fellas who are in office? To be frequently speaking about disaster mitigation and preparedness, Mr. Speaker? So, Honorable Henderson made reference to financial resilience. And Mr. Speaker, that's important to get you back on your feet or to the normalcy as quickly as possible. Access to cash. And most importantly, because the government is a major engine for intervention, it's important that the government has access to quick cash to restore our roads, whatever the case may be, so that the people can actually get to some semblance of normalcy. Now, from the community level, Mr. Speaker, it's also important that you can have access to financing. One would expect that money could be used to create employment, etc., etc., etc. And that is also very important, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I think, and Honorable Senator Joseph made reference to the fact that she supports this resolution, but if any PS button, sir, if any PS button, you cannot say I want to get married to you, but. It's either you want to get married or not. Then if any button, sir, it doesn't have but in that. Right? You getting married, you love me, you love me. Yes, I do, I appreciate that. Okay, as simple as that. But when you think, Mr. Speaker, when you think, Mr. Speaker, now, now and again in the house you have to laugh, man. You can't be all serious about that. When you speak, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the interest component, 3/4 of 1% interest rate, a grace period of 10 years. How much better does it get, Mr. Speaker? And the question is, Mr. Speaker, as I went on, is that those interventions and access to those kind of concessionary financing does not come by accident. It does not come by accident, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, permit me to refer to two quotes there, because this morning, this leader of the opposition made reference to Jose Marti, and then he made reference to a quote, but he was very selective in the selection of that quote. And as a student of social science myself, very much familiar, I've had quotes, I know that he had many, many quotes. And then, Mr. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, on the whole issue of relevance, I'm going to say that we're able to get this kind of, the possibility of drawing down those facilities. Because the international financial organizations have faith and confidence in the leader of the country. And then, because they know most of the things that he's spearheading is to take care of the less fortunate. Yes. That is manifested in our healthcare intervention, in our housing and education, and our response to disaster in this country. Yes. So you need a leader who is like a star, not somebody who reflects the brilliance he receives, Mr. Speaker. Not somebody who reflects the brilliance that he receives only. And having said that, Mr. Speaker, let me take this quote in its totality. Men are like stars. Some generate, Mr. Speaker, their own light, while others reflect the brilliance of others. He missed that quote. And it was missed out of convenience and expedience, Mr. Speaker. Let me repeat for emphasis. No, men are like stars. Some generate their own light, while others reflect the brilliance they receive. Now, as I close, Mr. Speaker, we do not want, Mr. Speaker, a situation in a country that is so narrow-based, and that one power, that one is my nene, godfather, godmother, to be fighting with each other. We want leaders and parliamentary representatives who understand the communities in which they live, who understand the people, because only through that engagement and interaction you can come up with plans and programs that are responsive to the needs of the people you represent. You understand what I'm saying? You have to know your community. So I find that quote from the same author, who did not only fight to liberate Cuba from Spain, he was a journalist, wrote many essays, he was everything. He said, he who could have been a touch and stoops, Mr. Speaker, to being a pair of jaws is a disaster. Let me repeat, Mr. Speaker. He who could have been a touch and stoops to being a pair of jaws is a disaster, and a dangerous one too. It wasn't in this quote, I just added that one. Yes, sir? I found those quotes to be very appropriate. And it actually sets a distinction between two personalities.
Yes, yes.
Who want to leave this country?
One more minute.
It's okay, Mr. Speaker. I don't want any more. I'm winding down, I'm winding down. Mr. Speaker, I'm winding down. Why not went down? I don't go down. Don't I don't went down, Mr. Speaker. Why not went down? I don't know. Another one. So, Mr. Speaker, I know I know. So, yes. So, Mr. Speaker, on a more serious note, this resolution, Mr. Speaker, is in keeping with his government's commitment from our Prime Minister to making Dominica the first climate resilient country in the world. It's one thing to have a vision, but it's the other thing to have plans that are realistic, that will cause you to actually realize that vision. And when we see the practical manifestation on the ground, and within the resilience of our own people, Mr. Speaker, we are getting there day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year. We will get there ultimately, Mr. Speaker. So finally, Mr. Speaker, this resolution before this Honorable House, let me read again. Authorization for a credit facility from the International Development Association for financing of a disaster risk management development policy with a catastrophe deferred drawdown option, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. I already asked to make changes to the agenda. Thank you.
This concludes the debate on the motion. I will now put the question. Be it resolved that in accordance with Section 3.1 of the Loans Act, Chapter 6405, as amended, this Honorable House authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow by means of a credit a sum not exceeding 20 million United States dollars, equivalent to 54 million Eastern Caribbean dollars, on the following terms. Interest, 0.75% per annum, plus a basis adjustment on the service charge, currently at 0.75%. Commitment charge, half of 1% per annum. Repayment, 60 semi-annual installments commencing November 15th, 2032. And the grace period, 10 years. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The motion has been affirmed.
Mr. Speaker, be it resolved that in accordance with Section 71(6) of the Standing Orders of the House of Assembly, the Standing Orders Committee commends to this House its report on the appropriate date from which the payment of salary to elected representatives and senators should be calculated. Wait a second. Mr. Speaker, I would like to draw the members of this Honorable House to the attention to the report called the House of Assembly of the Commonwealth of Dominica Standing Orders Committee Report, Payment of Salaries to Elected Representatives and Senators. And to say, Mr. Speaker, it was an honor working with you as the chair on that serious and important business of the matters of the Parliament. Because rightly so, Mr. Speaker, the Parliament is an organization, it's the highest court, as we say, and has to also ensure that the members within its purview are able to benefit from all of the trappings of democracy. And so I want to also thank the other honorable members of the committee who sat, Honorable Fidel Grant, Honorable Daniel Luge, and Honorable Ernie Lawrence John Finn. And also to highlight the work done by Mr. Daniel James, the secretary, and also Ms. Lauren Joseph, the stenographer. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw all of the members' attention to page 1, and I will run through it very briefly, paragraph by paragraph, to get a clear understanding. And paragraph 1, members, through you, Mr. Speaker, basically tells us about our overall powers and the mandate we were given. Very, very clear in paragraph 1. In paragraph 2, which begins on April 26, basically speaks to or spoke to the resolution. And this resolution was passed on April 26, 2021. And this paragraph here speaks to the resolution itself. And paragraph 3, it speaks about, Mr. Speaker, the debate that ensued, and which is all of the details are in the Hansards that we can refer to as we move forward. Paragraph 3, Mr. Speaker, is the call for the report in itself. And so, members, and through you, Mr. Speaker, members, we have a background of the entire process. And in the first paragraph, number 1, it speaks to the receipt of certain letters by the clerk of the House. Paragraph 2 speaks to the letters and the contents and what they were really seeking to address. And paragraph 3 speaks to a memorandum dated June 5th. And at the end of the memorandum, there was no action taken. It's a very, very important point, Mr. Speaker, as we draw our attention to how we deal with the matters of the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, through you, I'd like to draw the members' attention to page 2 of the report. And paragraph 4 here states the receipt of a letter from the present parliamentarians. So before we had members who sat in previous parliaments, but paragraph 4 speaks to a receipt of letter from members of this 10th parliament. And the following paragraph, Mr. Speaker, speaks to a chronological order of events that happened throughout the conversation. And so if I draw your attention to Roman numeral number 1, it speaks to the memorandum on the 23rd of March, and the details of it. And the 2 speaks to the intervention of the Honorable Attorney General. 3 speaks to the response in regards to the opinion vis-a-vis the established practices. Mr. Speaker, section 4, the consequence of the letter of November 30th. And we go throughout the document speaking to all of the relevant historical background to the paper. Mr. Speaker, through you, I'd like to draw the attention of the members to the important part on page 3, the actions to be taken. And I'm hoping that we have some time to read through the report very carefully. And I just want to state here very, very clearly that the action taken, the House debated the resolution, and because there's no conclusion, we were mandated as the Standing Orders Committee to meet, review, and discuss the matter with a view of making recommendations to this Honorable House. And so in summary, Mr. Speaker, we have a series of meetings that we've done as a committee with you as the chair. And so we, on the very last paragraph here, meeting of June 7th, we detail the actions done. If we move our attention, Mr. Speaker, to page 4, the meeting of June 24th, in a nutshell, it was a very general discussion, and we deliberated on the movements forward. For you again, Chair, the meeting of July 12th involved a virtual presentation by a former parliamentarian. I'd like to draw the members of Parliament to that particular important intervention here. And the meeting of the fourth meeting on January 31st also had a presentation from sitting parliamentarians in the 10th Parliament, in this Parliament. Let me draw your attention, Mr. Speaker, to page 5. And in page 5, the meeting of February 7th, we did have an intervention. We had a presentation by the Attorney General via the telephone, and he gave his advice. And let me draw your attention to the bullet point 2, and it reads, in the final analysis, it was unanimously decided by the committee as follows. With effect from the commencement of this 10th Parliament, under the Commonwealth of Dominica Constitution, the entitlement of payment of salary to elected representatives and senators shall be calculated from the day after the poll at which the elected representative is elected, or the day after the date on which the senator is appointed, as the case may be. Mr. Speaker, the third bullet point, very important also. It was further agreed that a recommendation would be made to the Honorable Prime Minister as the Chair of the Cabinet, seeking its approval for the aforementioned resolution to be part of the order paper for further consideration for this Parliament. And so in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the committee agreed that what happened in the past was settled practice. There was no entitlement. And secondly, the committee also agreed that since the matter was brought by sitting members of the 10th Parliament, any action or recommendation should be in the current Parliament or future Parliaments. And so, Mr. Speaker, draw your attention to recommendation that in the final analysis, in a nutshell, the committee recommends that the payments be made from the 10th Parliament, and also that the resolution for the payments of salary for elected members be brought back to Parliament since the House was prorogued before the report was tabled. And the last point, Mr. Speaker, that there should be an amendment to the Standing Order 3 of the Standing Orders of the House of Assembly 1986 should be brought to Parliament for approval. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The motion is before the House for debate.
Thank you very much, the members of this honorable House on both sides who have accepted this report wholeheartedly, and there's no need for debate, and so I'm very excited, Mr. Speaker, and I want to commend you again, Mr. Speaker. We have had a parliament we had 9 parliaments before all of this. I'm happy that in the 10th Parliament we can add some value to the parliamentarians, and because we know for a fact, and I can speak for myself, that right after the polls, I was Mr. Parrott, and I was called to advise and called to give help. And I suspect also, Mr. Speaker, I was sort of that before that too, a little before that. So it wasn't by chance that I actually became the parliamentary representative. But to say that it is fitting that the Honorable House take these decisions as such, to ensure that there's fairness, while we attempt to provide a safe and very conducive environment for the citizens. The citizens must also understand that as parliamentarians, as representatives, we also need to be taken care of. So I'm happy for your support in the Honorable House, and happy to have the wonderful colleagues on both sides who have agreed and on the course moving forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I just wanted to say that it was a very fruitful exercise, but I wanted to also point out not just the Standing Orders Committee, but all our other committees should take a lead from the work that we have done. And importantly, if you look at the process, we met several times, and we brought the report to Parliament, so Parliament can accept the report, debate the report, or reject the report. And therefore, that's why I've said before, whether a report is tabled at Parliament unless Parliament accept the report, we cannot have it as a substantive matter for debate. You see, we can refer to a report by saying, well, a report was tabled, but in regard to the content of the report, unless Parliament itself as the committee of the whole House have accepted it and or rejected part of it or all of it, then we cannot have it as a substantive matter for debate. You know, so I just wanted to just point that out, but also in regards to moving forward on this substantive matter, we have next steps. So let me just go through the process. So this concludes the debate on the matter. I will now put the question. Be it resolved that in accordance with section 71(6) of the Standing Orders of the House of Assembly, that the report of the Standing Orders Committee, in which is being recommended that with effect from the commencement of this 10th Parliament under the Commonwealth of Dominica Constitution, the entitlement of payment of salary to elected representatives and senators shall be calculated from the day after the poll at which elected representative is elected, or the day after the date on which the senator is appointed, as the case may be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The motion has been adopted. And therefore, let me just to reiterate so we can remember what we have adopted, especially in regards to the recommendation. The recommendation says, the committee recommends that the payment of salaries to elected representatives and senators be made from the 10th Parliament, meaning that effective December 2019, and remember the date, December 7th? Nice. So that's one. Number two, a resolution relating to the payment of salaries for elected representatives commencing the day following the polls be brought back to Parliament, since the House was prorogued before the committee report was tabled in the past. And therefore, to make this matter be effective, we'd have to bring back the resolution to Parliament. So Parliament can now do the resolution like all other resolutions we have done in this honorable House. Then the final part, that's free, an amendment to the standing order, and the standing order free of the standing orders of the House of Assembly, that is the 1986 version there, should be brought to Parliament for approval. So, what we need to do now, as the Standing Orders Committee, we have to meet, discuss with the Attorney General in regards to the language of the amendment that is to Standing Orders free. And so when we bring it back to Parliament, one, the resolution will be brought back with also the amendment. Furthermore, in regards to the same report, we had discussion on certain matters that members of Parliament in the debate, so we'll go back to the Hansard, where members of Parliament actually said that in regards to the standing orders, they would like certain matters to be dealt with in the standing orders. For example, one matter was, should members be paid even if they don't attend Parliament without excuses? So again, when we are bringing back the amendment, we look at all these issues. Whether or not, for example, if a member misses Parliament without permission, without written consent, can we prorate that member in terms of the salary impact? And therefore, it will force the discipline and the respect. Furthermore, and I was saying earlier also, I just want to highlight it again, in regards to the standing orders. If we are going to meet to deal with those amendments, I'm urging members of Parliament to also bring their suggestions in regards to the standing order amendments. So we'll just do one thing. whether then we go back and forth. So in regards to that matter and the standing order and the report, that's what I would like to just clarify, although we have passed the resolution. So thank you in regards to this standing order matter. We proceeding in regards to, we have a final major item, that's the Virtual Asset Business Act 2022.
Okay. Second and third reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Virtual Asset Business Act 2022.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the emergence of virtual assets globally and regionally has generated growing public interest and diverse legislative responses. A virtual asset is a digital representation of value that can be traded or transferred digitally. Virtual assets can be used for making payments or investments. Cryptocurrencies, such as bitcoins, are examples of virtual assets. Mr. Speaker, although the trading or transfer of virtual assets do not currently pose a material risk to financial stability here in Dominica, our government has recognized the need to put the necessary regulatory framework in place to ensure vigilant monitoring of this new, rapidly developing and potentially disruptive financial instruments. The Virtual Asset Business Bill has been drafted with the assistance of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the ECCB. The idea is to have a harmonized legislation across all member states of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, since all members operate in a single monetary space. The bill has so far been passed by the governments of Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts and Nevis. The draft bill has gone through 3 revisions spearheaded by the ECCB. Each revision was subject to consultation with stakeholders. Feedback received from the stakeholders on each draft were considered and informed the bill, which is now being presented to this House. Mr. Speaker, in summary, the bill contains 23 clauses and 3 schedules. It provides for the Financial Services Unit, the FSU, of the Ministry of Finance to be responsible for the oversight of virtual asset businesses, except in the case of virtual assets that are considered investment products or services. These will be regulated by the Eastern Caribbean Securities Regulatory Commission under the Securities Act. The bill applies to any person, including any business, who, whether before or after commencement of this legislation, is involved in virtual asset business. It requires these persons to register with the Financial Services Unit of the Ministry of Finance in order to offer or operate a virtual asset business. Once registered, a certificate of registration will be issued to each registrant, and registrants will be required to renew their registration annually if they desire to continue being registered. The bill also provides for the suspension and revocation of registration. Mr. Speaker, a person with a registered office outside of Dominica will be required to appoint and have at all times in place a person who is ordinarily resident in Dominica to be its principal representative. That representative will be responsible for, among other things, the daily management of the place of business and act as liaison between the registrant and the Financial Services Unit. Registrants will be required to place in escrow accounts assets to meet and discharge their financial obligations to their clients. These assets must be equivalent to 40% of the total value of client funds held by the registrant. The registrant will also be required to lodge his software source code and associate materials used in his virtual asset business with a software escrow agent. Mr. Speaker, registrants are to submit quarterly reports on the number and value of accounts held, as well as a statement of the assets held in escrow. There are offenses and penalties, including where a person makes a false declaration in an application, where a person makes a false or misleading declaration for the purpose of retaining or gaining a client, where a person operates a virtual asset business without being registered under the bill, or where a person contravenes a provision of the Act. Administrative penalties will also be levied and recovered as a civil debt where applicable. Mr. Speaker, we are of the view that this bill lays the foundation for what could become a thriving business activity here in Dominica. It will create another avenue for employment, trade, and investment. It is yet another step by your government toward the diversification and transformation of our economy. Mr. Speaker, I now commend the bill cited as the Virtual Asset Business Act 2022 to the House.
The bill is before the House for debate.
Good evening to the parliamentary colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I just want to have a brief intervention on this very important bill brought before this House. Albeit it is a harmonized legislation which mirrors that has been passed in other countries within the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. And the nexus of what is being presented here is as a direct consequence of the rise in virtual currencies, and in which would include non-fungible tokens. Mr. Speaker, in my mind, it is a bill which offers great opportunities to Dominica. It is in sync with the thrust toward the digital economy, and I would wholly accept and support that bill. Mr. Speaker, considering the fact that with the emergence of technologies, the potential benefits that could be derived in the adequate use of those technologies makes
business cheaper, easier, faster, and overall limits the direct need for cash. And by doing so, it expands the financial footprint. And in that being, your transactions are more traceable. It helps you to have a greater leverage on fighting crime, Mr. Speaker, or money laundering in that particular aspect. And today we have seen the market cap for digital assets raised from 14 billion in 2008 to a current $3 trillion, Mr. Speaker. And likewise, that exponential increase in the use of virtual currencies such as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies opens up a great niche for, and as ably said by the Honorable Minister, opens up a new initiatives for our young people and Dominicans to be able to benefit tremendously and improve their livelihoods. Mr. Speaker, I must admit that if we are serious about the digital economy, this piece of legislation is in the right standing. However, I would implore of the government side to ensure that that information trickles down to the grassroots in our communities. And I would further suggest that we have a massive educational program or drive to ensure that people understand the legislation, people understand what is there and how it would impact us in any way, sort of form. We must also consider, Mr. Speaker, take into consideration Dcash, the opportunities that Dcash itself has already brought to us by bringing another form of our own digital currency. Mr. Speaker, even our indigenous businesses like Mlaja, how they can really leverage from this legislation. Things won't remain the same. As technology advances, we expect there would be changes, and we have to move with the times. And I really want to want my voice to be heard in really accepting this legislation. Whatever improvements that will be done or that necessitates as things evolve, I would really hope that we could do them timely to remain ahead of the game. So many times we have legislations that are forced upon us that we have to react. And coming here to bring that piece of legislation at this point in time in our development is really responsible. I must say it is something that will really improve the way that we operate in Dominica. Mr. Speaker, one may ask why it is significant to have this piece of legislation which mirrors that which exists in other countries. It's just simply because of the whole nature of the business itself that is virtual. You could remain from or be operating any point on the globe and still be competitive within that particular market, and then it allows us to really seamlessly transact. In the best interest of our citizens, Mr. Speaker, once the securities of those systems can remain as robust as they currently are, and I could foresee the virtual asset business as the new frontier or the paradigm shift or the next big thing. And I really, again, I want to say I really want to pledge support towards this bill. With this being said, Mr. Speaker, I just want to reiterate, I may be sound repetitive, but I hope that we could really invest in education, ensuring that our people who operate there remember that the security of their assets is their responsibility. The security of your investment or your wise investment decisions lay in your hands, and we really want to advise that whenever you do so from an informed position. One of the concerns that I have with the bill is the fee structure. The application fees is in a tune of The fee structure at the back, Mr. Speaker, I see a $10,000 for the application fee and the registration fee of $42,400, Mr. Speaker. I am of the view that this may be a limiting factor for local or indigenous businesses. In my humble opinion, it may be in contravention of antitrust legislation, which really limits, which really hinders the fair, which really hinders fair competition, Mr. Speaker, because let's say, for example, there are very good initiatives. The individual may not be able to raise the requisite investment, and it will not really contribute towards the holistic development of the system. And these are just some of the reservations that I have. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, I really want to grant my support towards the enactment of this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a harmonized bill.
You must do it, or you last that do it at all.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this virtual asset business bill, Mr. Speaker. This being part of another revolutionary, progressive legislation that is truly predicated upon tremendous foresight by this government, by this administration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this world is changing. The way we socialize, the way we transact business, the way we operate, it's all changing, Mr. Speaker. I think of past generations, maybe even your own, Mr. Speaker, where probably merely playing a game would involve physical sports or making a truck, sec. In my time, gaming consoles like Game Boys. Yeah, I'm not saying not at all. Yeah, I'm not suggesting not at all. Vous plivez, passez-moi. And Mr. Speaker, in my time, gaming consoles, Sega, Genesis, Nintendo, PlayStation, whatever you call it. Right now, when I listen to my children speak and my colleagues' children, they speak of Roblox, Mr. Speaker. They all speak of Roblox. And it is really a gaming platform and gaming development platform where children and even everyone can get online in a virtual space, Mr. Speaker, and not only to play games, but to develop their own games using that platform. From 3 years old, 4, 5, 6, they're already coding and making their games, and their peers are now playing these games that these youngsters are coding, Mr. Speaker. So that is the world that we live in, Mr. Speaker, and that platform is free. But to let you know, Mr. Speaker, there are in-app purchases that can be made. So they have their own currency that they call Robux, Mr. Speaker. So if the children can have their Robux and their currency, why not us, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, this generation, the Generation X, Generation Z, and even now, Generation Alpha, they are smart, they are truly inspired, Mr. Speaker. They operate differently, Mr. Speaker, and they are truly revolutionary in their thinking. And Mr. Speaker, this is why governments like us, Mr. Speaker, have to ensure that we keep up to speed, Mr. Speaker, that we keep up to the times. And not only that must we keep up, but we should actually be leaders of this transformation and that which we are doing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in this changing world, everything has been pretty much upended, Mr. Speaker. And this is why we are presenting this bill today, Mr. Speaker, this virtual asset business bill today. Mr. Speaker, when we think in the past of assets, what would have come to mind would be land, and in some houses, or commodities, Mr. Speaker, in the financial space, even cattle, gold, silver, precious metals, and so on. And over the time, Mr. Speaker, we have seen that change to legal tender, for example, that which would have in some cases been backed by these very commodities that I spoke of. Then eventually over time, we would have seen that that would have changed, same legal tender, then becoming fiat currency, Mr. Speaker, which would really and truly be given value based on a decree or declaration by government. And Mr. Speaker, we've seen this changing in our own time, Mr. Speaker, where now we have representative currencies, Mr. Speaker. We have checks, we have credit cards, we have debit cards, and so on, that which is also accepted as fiat currency. And now we are seeing another transformation, most recently Dcash, which Senator Marcelin spoke of, and Mlaja and so on. Recently, we have accepted that as fiat currency, but now what we are seeing is further transformation right before our very eyes, and we're speaking of virtual assets, Mr. Speaker. And among these virtual assets, we have different types, and we've been hearing of cryptocurrency. This one so happens to be the most popular, Mr. Speaker, but for Bitcoin being one of those cryptocurrencies, Mr. Speaker, we also have asset-backed tokens, and we have stable coin as well, among others, Mr. Speaker. However, cryptocurrency is more talked about, it's more touted about, Mr. Speaker. And of course, this is fundamentally different from fiat currency, and this is what we're speaking of today, Mr. Speaker. So it is not legal tender, which is given value by a government. It is different from that, Mr. Speaker. It is not backed by any type of commodity, Mr. Speaker. It's completely different. But instead, really, it is backed by blockchain technology and cryptography and various unique hashes, Mr. Speaker. So it is certainly more complex, but is one that is decentralized, and I say that to say that it is not regulated by one central authority, by the ECCB or the ECCU. It is decentralized, Mr. Speaker. But what happens is that it's more participatory in nature, Mr. Speaker, and that is one of the reasons why it has generated interest far and wide in a very short time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, why this bill today? There's so many reasons why we're bringing this forward today. There's absolutely growing interest in this, Mr. Speaker, around the world and even here in Dominica. And through the digital economy and the various consultations that we have been having, we have been hearing of our young professionals, our coders, and even other entrepreneurs speaking of their participation in this world, this realm of cryptocurrency, this crypto world, Mr. Speaker. And we are hearing. Mr. Speaker, the masses are interested, they are using it, they are trading using cryptocurrency, Mr. Speaker. And more we are realizing, and not only that, but we are recognizing the growing interest and the popularity. Mr. Speaker, our citizens are fascinated by cryptocurrency, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this is absolutely shaking up things around the world. And in some cases, it has disrupted a few economies, and certainly Honorable Henderson spoke to it. This hasn't happened here in Dominica as yet, but we are taking the steps, the preliminary, precursory steps to ensure that this is not the case for us, Mr. Speaker. We don't want to feel that interference and we are so-called caught with our pants down, Mr. Speaker. So we recognize the value of the potential transformation in this realm. Mr. Speaker, why this bill? Mr. Speaker, various countries within the ECCU they have recognized that these prerequisite steps must be taken to establish the basic framework for virtual asset businesses, Mr. Speaker. And so that these businesses, which would have otherwise been on the fringes of society, Mr. Speaker, to be accepted and be recognized by an authority. Mr. Speaker, we all know how humans behave, and when you have new technology, sometimes there might be a veil, a shroud of doubt, Mr. Speaker. So that's one of the avenues which we are now creating, which we are now proposing through this bill, Mr. Speaker. So these businesses conducting transactions within that virtual space with virtual assets can move from the fringes, but now to the mainstream in society, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, through this bill, we'll be providing an avenue for registration, licensing, and supervision of virtual asset businesses. And this is absolutely and truly revolutionary. And I welcome this, Mr. Speaker. Like I've said, these are the first steps. There are more steps that will follow later on. And I welcome that for sure, because we need to do it all the way and lay the framework for virtual assets businesses to truly conduct completely, and to lay the steps for which fiat currency is traded with virtual assets, and so on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I started off my day this morning by meeting a legal advisory firm which the ministry has engaged to assist with our digital transformation program, Mr. Speaker. And that is a very important consultation that is about to take place. And through our project implementation unit, Mr. Speaker, we have contracted this firm, this consortium, which comprises of so many experts, so many legal luminaries around the world with experience in digital transformation and the legislation thereof, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in this team, we have 5 senior policy advisors. We have 3 legal specialists, one of which is a QC, Mr. Speaker, who is internationally recognized for his prowess in legislation and drafting as it relates to digital transformation, Mr. Speaker. So these are the types of engagements that we have ongoing at the ministry to facilitate digital transformation, Mr. Speaker. So this is ongoing. We'll continue to review various policies and legislation, Mr. Speaker, and this team of legal advisors will so advise the government, Mr. Speaker, and on various aspects of policy and legislative reforms and frameworks. So these are exciting times. We live in very dynamic times, Mr. Speaker. I have lived a very short life so far. Praise God for the time I have lived, but I read a lot. And even in history, in what I have read, what I've been exposed to, I do not know of a more dynamic or more fluid time, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding that, one of the things that we should be happy about as Dominicans, as Caribbean people, is that, Mr. Speaker, we have leadership. We have a government, Mr. Speaker, that is empowered, a government that is extraordinary, well-purposed, and suitable for the times, Mr. Speaker. A government that is fully capable of having the right thinking, Mr. Speaker, and understanding the circumstances that we live in and what we are faced with, Mr. Speaker, to lead and to direct extraordinary people, extraordinary Dominicans, to pursuing their dreams, their goals, their futures, Mr. Speaker. So that is what we have, and we should absolutely be proud of that. Mr. Speaker, I'm assured that we are on the right track, and this bill that we have presented here today, Mr. Speaker, is truly a representation of the manifestation of resilience that we have touted and we have promised the good people of Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I unreservedly endorse this bill here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to place on record my support for this very important bill. As has been said by those who have addressed the House before me, this is breaking new ground, and it is legislation which is meant to harmonize this aspect of this emerging form of business mechanism throughout this region. Mr. Speaker, I really just wish to, in addition to supporting the bill, observe, based on the observation of the Honorable Senator regarding the fees, that my understanding is that this is really a financial enterprise, for want of a better term. It is akin to the banking industry, but by a different means, a modern means. And just as in the banking industry, one would not expect for the fees and the entry requirements to be as low as to be so hanging so low to the ground that any and everyone can join in. Similarly, in this regard, there's an element of necessity to protect you and I should we decide to engage or use those services. And therefore, those who engage in this necessarily must be able to have a certain financial integrity, stability, and means. That, as I understand it, is the major reason for the fees being in the region that they are. Somebody was whispering a little earlier on that this is not children merely. This is serious stuff, requiring serious regulation and requiring those who choose to enter into that field to demonstrate the capacity to offer the service, but also to offer it with a certain level of integrity and a certain level of protection for the consumers who will rely on their services. I will say no more on that at this time, but the main point of me rising is to express my support for the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just on a few points of clarification, and I take full responsibility for perhaps not delving a little more into the definition of virtual assets. I think it's important because I don't want us to misinterpret and therefore forming the wrong view. But just to refer to the definition in the bill itself, virtual asset means a digital representation of value that can be digitally traded or transferred and can be used for payment or investment purposes. But what is important is what comes after and does not include digital representations of fiat currency or security. It's important to make that distinction because Dcash, for example, is based on a fiat currency, that is to say the Eastern Caribbean dollar, and would therefore not qualify as a virtual asset because it is just a means of transacting with a fiat currency, meaning a currency that is being issued by a central bank. So in our case, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank issues the Eastern Caribbean dollar. The United States Federal Reserves will issue US dollars and so forth and so forth. So countries with their central banks issue their currencies, which are legal tender. El Salvador, as we know, it is the only country in the world that has declared cryptocurrencies as legal tender. So they have a different system that deals with those virtual assets or cryptocurrencies in their case. So M-Larger, for example, would not fall under this virtual assets bill because it is, again, it's just a mechanism, an application, a digital way to transact using fiat currencies, so using money that already exists. Now, as someone who's been in the crypto business for a very long time, about 10 years ago, I have a little knowledge of how this thing works. So what this bill seeks to do is to provide for the regulation of businesses that involve using cryptocurrencies, and especially not just, well, those that exist, you will be able to have what is referred to as exchanges. So you have a Bitcoin exchange, for example. That is if you want to get fiat currency, if you want to get US dollars, Eastern Caribbean dollars against your Bitcoin, that kind of business will be set up to allow for those types of transactions, but also to allow for the purchase and sale of those currencies, those cryptocurrencies. So in order to do that type of business, an entity has to be registered so that it has to go through the process. The fees, 4,000 US, 12,000 US. I mean, those fees are not unreasonable for this type of businesses. And as I said, they will not affect, I don't think there's any existing business that would fall under this, unless if there's a guy who is producing his own cryptocurrencies, you know, in his mother's basement somewhere in Wallhouse, or I don't know. I mean, but it also creates something that Minister Laville spoke to. It prepares us for the future, so that if, you know, we have some genius among us who decide they want to make their own cryptocurrencies and they will get people to buy it. I think there's one that's there was a recent one, and it was going all over the place. A lot of our people were getting involved in that. I forgot the name. Doge, no, Doge is an older one. It's a recent one. I'll get it. I get all those. It's like a circle. It has a circle aspect to it, because if you introduce people to it, they tell you they give you a coin, and it was a recent one. They were trying to get it they were trying to popularize it, and they were trying to give incentives for people to subscribe. Yeah, so there are a few newer ones. So that also presents or creates the opportunity to regulate those kinds of businesses. And I think it's forward thinking. It's something that you never know. Dominica could become a center for cryptocurrencies. Especially, one of the things, I'll be quite honest, being someone who had a few Bitcoins myself, I have a difficulty personally with cryptocurrencies, because I still fundamentally opposed to the fact that you can use so much electricity to create a currency virtually. I think electricity should be to make people's lives better. The poor in Africa who have no access to electricity, and those of us who pay high electricity rates. But anyway, it's an opportunity for us. We have geothermal, and geothermal is a source that those people in the crypto business love, because it gives them the baseload power they need, and some of them are trying to go green. I have received calls from a friend who first introduced me to cryptocurrencies in 2012, somewhere thereabouts, and he owns some crypto mining facility in Iceland where they have geothermal power, and has been looking to Dominica as a place where they could set up some of those crypto mining, as it is called, so that it could generate some business. It could create an opportunity for us. So you would need to regulate. So this is forward thinking. So if an opportunity like that comes down the road, it means that we are ready, we are prepared to facilitate those kinds of businesses. Or perhaps a young entrepreneur who just created a cryptocurrency can move his business to Dominica. I'm sure what we'll be charging them is nothing compared to what they would have to pay somewhere else in the more advanced economies. And therefore, it is forward thinking, but we need to, and I hope that our leader of the digital economy will see this as an opportunity to encourage businesses in virtual assets to move to Dominica, to headquarter in Dominica, because we have the legal framework for that. One of the things that we don't have quite yet, but I'm sure the Ministry of Finance is enhancing their capacity, is the ability of the FSU to provide the supervision and especially to create the escrow for the deposit, I think I try to remember exactly how it's referred to in the bill. I don't want to confuse terms, but it is the need to ensure that the code, the source code for those assets are deposited with an escrow agent of the FSU for that purpose. And that is important because you don't want someone to have people buying into their virtual assets and then they disappear and everything lost. I don't know if you've seen some of those scary stories. And again, it is always important. People are free to invest as they wish. This is a democratic country. This is a capitalist system where people are free to trade. But we have to always be careful that those things can be so volatile that people must be careful that they do not put too much of their money in these things. At one point, I was going crazy because I lost some Bitcoins I had, and the thing had gone up so much, I maybe would have had a lot of money. And I can't find the password. I can't find the code. I couldn't find the code. Well, I have a good friend who was in a similar position. But it is important to have, you know, the administrative support and the supervisory, you know, competence to ensure that this could be an opportunity for Dominica. I think the biggest part about it is inviting businesses to Dominica so that they can headquarter here in this new legislative framework. Finally, public education, I'm sure that will be done. Good point, thank you very much, Senator, for your observation and your contribution and your support. That is something that definitely will have to be done because it's important to educate the public of what exactly it is that we've done here tonight. Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
This concludes the debate. It has been moved and seconded that the bill, shortly entitled Virtual Asset Business Act 2022, be read a second time. Let me just repeat this. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Virtual Asset Business Act 2022 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will not be read a second time. Mr. Clerk, do it now.
Virtual Asset Business Act 2022.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House is in committee. I do report the bill to the House with one minor amendment. House resumes, and I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Virtual Asset Business Act 2022 passed the committee stage with minor amendment. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted as amended. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Virtual Asset Business Act 2022 be read a third time and passed.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Virtual Asset Business Act 2022 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Virtual Asset Business Act 2022.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be adjourned, sine die.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the House be adjourned, sine die. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The House stand adjourned, sine die.